We've found some descriptors. Now, what about identifiers? By the end of this video, I'd like you to understand how to start the process of seeking identifiers and how to anchor your understanding with instance data, so you can be a savvy data modeler. We just found descriptors for camera. Every entity must have an identifier, and because camera has no identifier yet, we are in a state of invalid syntax. So we want to fix that right away by seeking an identifier. If you're talking to a technical person, especially a data expert, you could ask, how do you identify a camera? Or, what is the unique identifier for a camera? But these typically aren't natural questions for users. You're really just transferring knowledge about an existing data model from one technical expert to another. In this class, we're interested in a process that will work even when talking to non-technical users, even when there is no existing database system. This means we need to ask a more abstract question. Instead, we can ask the users, how do you distinguish two cameras from each other? This is often a challenging question, and you should not assume the users immediately understand it. I want to call it that we're asking about two cameras. We recommend this wording to get the users thinking harder about separate specific instances instead of general groups of things. Now, I've seen cases where users don't understand this question because they've never even worked with the data directly. Or sometimes the subject matter has never had any software built for it, so the users may be thinking about physical cameras instead of data representing those cameras. Some additional words that might help are, in terms of data or on paper, how do you distinguish two cameras from each other? At this point, the conversation could go many ways. Let's suppose they say, each camera has a unique serial number. Usually when they say there's a unique number, it's pretty clear-cut. They may not have mentioned the serial number up until that point, but that's fine. We can now add it to the entity with a bar under it. Are we done with this step? Not really. It's a good idea to confirm what you've found. Again, for seeking identifiers, we've asked a specific question, gotten an answer, and made an update. Last time, after seeking descriptors, we skipped steps 4 and 5. The reason was that seeking identifier was higher priority. We didn't want to do any kind of reading about the camera entity because without an identifier, it was not yet syntactically valid to read. And now the situation's different. We have an identifier, so our entity is complete and valid. So this time, we'll follow confirmation steps 4 and 5. Here's how we can read the model back to them. First, I like to focus on the identifier. I would ask, let me confirm how we distinguish two cameras from each other. About each camera, we must remember its serial number. No two cameras can have the same serial number. These two statements specify exactly what this simple identifier means. We'll get to more complex examples in a bit. Additionally, previously we skipped reading back the descriptors we found, so we can read those back now too. Additionally, about each camera, we can remember its manufacturer, its model name, its release year, and its photos. From there, you can continue discussing and iterating with the users until everyone is in agreement. Now let's return to the seek identifier step and imagine a different scenario. Again, let's ask, how do you distinguish two cameras from each other? This time, let's suppose they say, different cameras have different manufacturers and different model names. There are some warning signs here that the users might not have fully understood the question. They used plurals, they didn't use each, and they heavily used the word different. But for the sake of example, let's ignore all of that for now. Take what they said at face value and put a bar under each of those attributes. This is also a valid identifier, and it may be a better answer than the previous one, or it may not. As a modeler, now is not the time to turn it around and tell them that it would be better to choose a unique ID number. That may not fit the user's needs as well. Remember to be neutral, think about what and not how. Two or more bars are perfectly valid to have and might be more relevant to the user than a simple ID number. Just know that when there are two or more bars, the model is more complex and you should take steps to confirm it. When we have a two-part identifier, that is two identifying descriptors in the same identifier, the meaning becomes more complicated. So I typically jump straight into writing down instance data first, so I have something concrete to point at while reading. Writing instances is something you can consider doing at all steps in the process, but this is a time when it's very commonly worth doing. I would draw a blank table with each attribute getting its own column, and I would again underline just the attributes that we're considering identifying descriptors. They may not know what that means yet, but it may get their attention. So what are some instances of camera? Canon EOS 5D Mark II. Okay, Canon is the manufacturer and the model name is EOS 5D Mark II. Yes. As we go through this process, as the modeler, I continue to hold onto the pen and write down data reflecting what I'm hearing. But I make sure the users can see what I'm writing and I allow them to interrupt and make corrections if they see something wrong. What's the release year? 2008. Okay, how about another instance? After some conversation, suppose we've written down several instances. Now we have something concrete to look at while reading the data model back to them. Let me confirm how we distinguish two cameras from each other. About each camera, we must remember its manufacturer and its model name. No two cameras can have the same manufacturer and the same model name. Two cameras could have the same manufacturer or the same model name. That's how you read back an identifier with two bars. The first two sentences are almost the same as the last example, but now there's a third sentence that mentions the fact that there could be some values repeated between two instances. For example, we see here two cameras with the same manufacturer. It would be a good idea to ask if you could have two cameras with the same model name because we see no examples of that here. Here's where I would make space to draw in an example like that and ask if it could ever happen. Could Sony come out with a new camera this year, 2019, and call it their D7000? What we've done here is a specific technique that's useful for verifying a multi-part identifier. I call it overlapping duplicates. We've highlighted that because the identifier calls for a unique combination, there's the possibility of duplicate values in each identifying descriptor. Specifically, we've drawn it in a way that shows the ways that the model allows duplicates. Notice the shape here with two overlapping pairs. This should generate useful discussion. I'd like you to remember and use this technique when you have a multi-part identifier. From here, there are whole other process steps we can take to verify a complex identifier. We'll get into this more in future material. For future reference, how do we read identifiers with 3 or more descriptors? You can still do it in 3 sentences like this. About each location, we must remember its latitude, longitude, and elevation. No two locations can have the same latitude, longitude, and same elevation. Two locations could share any two of latitude, longitude, and elevation. Now check your understanding.